Modern animism makes the oldest spiritual belief easy for today's seekers to understand, practice, and live. Stay tuned and grow with us.
If you look in the archives, you will see more than a few podcasts on death. We recently had one on green burials and death doulas, and today I'm talking with Reverend Olivia Bareham from Sacred Crossings, who is going to fill us in on home funerals. Having a send-off at home is one of the most intimate, special ways to say goodbye to your loved one. It's a way to have a relationship with death and prepare yourself for your own death because you've been through the process. I think it's also a good idea because it's a way to make life more meaningful. And before we get into the nitty-gritty with Olivia, let's acknowledge the elements. Acknowledge and thank the element of earth. It's where we came from and where we will return. It's our home. Thank you, earth. Acknowledge and thank air for the breath that sustains us. Acknowledge and thank the fire that keeps us warm, helps us to digest, and fuels our heart. I acknowledge and thank water. Water is life. Thank you. And I acknowledge and thank our plant, animal, mineral, and human brothers, sisters, and ancestors. We're all here together in this circle of life and depend on each other for life. So thank you. And a big thanks to all our listeners. What would be the point of having a podcast that no one listens to? The front needs a back. And without you, couldn't be here. The best way to give back is to use anything that inspires or educates you and bring it into your own life. A like or a share would be awesome too. All right, let's talk to Reverend Olivia Bareham. So Olivia, home funerals haven't been commonplace for quite some time in our culture. So how did this get on your radar?
Oh, wow. That takes me back 20 years when my own mother died. I went back home to shepherd her in her conscious dying, which was just a beautiful experience for both of us. I hope it was for her. It certainly sounded like it. But it was after she died, and the hospice nurse invited me to care for her body and prepare it and lay it out in honor. That's when I began to realize how there was this powerful opportunity to go deeper with not just my love and my care for my mother, but it just seemed like a very organic and normal thing to be doing. And it was helping me as I helped the nurse wash her and lay her out in honor in the house. It was helping me move through this transition of caring for mother and everything and being about her comfort, and there was sort of an urgency to it and a worry to the dying that because she was in pain and suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and now this was this most beautiful, still, etheric experience, and I wanted to have more of it. So I was very grateful to be able to help prepare her body and lay it out, and then invite family members and the neighbors in to participate in this wake with her body present. And I felt like, oh, there's something special here that we have hastily given up to the funeral industry, perhaps in our desire to have everything very convenient and comfortable. We've actually lost an opportunity to go to have an experience that we can't have anywhere else, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to keep her at home. And that's when I realized I didn't know how to do that, because what we don't know, we give up to authority or professionals who know better. And then there's a very subtle feeling of being disempowered and
Mm-hmm.
not knowing. So I noticed that feeling, and I just realized that it didn't have to be this way. So that was what kicked me off on a journey of figuring out how to keep this window open when somebody dies, so that family members can step into this liminal space, which is that space between worlds, and have time to adjust themselves to it, And who knows, it might be also serving the person who's just died in giving them a little more time to adjust to their new form and get out of here, out of the physical body. And after doing hundreds of these home funerals and basically, holding open the space so that people can have this experience, I'm realizing how deep this healing can go. And everybody who's present to a home funeral is profoundly changed by it. And that's what encouraged me to create my own funeral home, Sacred Crossings Funeral Home, where we can offer this to everybody who wants to partake of it.
Oh, that sounds really wonderful. How do you think that we moved from something that is natural and sacred to where we are now, where most people still don't know that home funeral is an option, dying at home is an option? I mean, it's very medicalized, and I think most people think you have to die in a hospital, and then you have to go to a funeral home where you're embalmed, and then somebody just takes care of it for you, and all you have to do is show up.
Exactly. We've given it up, and I don't think it happened consciously. I think that, well, I know how it started. At the end of the Civil War, the soldiers had to come home from the battlefield. So units of the army were trained in embalming so that these bodies could be brought home and shown to their family members to prove, that they had died, and now the family could have a service for them. And that naturally formed, well, unnaturally really, but these units of the army who knew how to do this then decided that they could offer it to civilians, and they could say, look, we know how to take care of your dead now to make them look like they're still just sleeping. Let us undertake this job for you so you don't have to do it anymore. And I just think that people agreed to it. They went, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I won't have to do that anymore, and gave their dead to this, what became the funeral industry. And they gave what used to be the parlor, which was a place to lay out the dead and take photographs and be present to it. They gave up the parlor to the funeral home. And that's why we have the funeral parlor, and we have the living room, because they gave it back to us for had the living there. And we collectively didn't realize that we were literally giving up the baby with the bathwater. We didn't realize the spiritual aspect of what was happening when we did that. So, and then people, just as they do, they agree with the collective. Oh, this is easier, tidier. I don't have to do it anymore. And I think it's this general move towards comfort and having things easier that we've done for the last 150 years that has gotten us into the pickle we're in now, where we're losing our connection to what it is to be human and to be responsible for all of the nuances of life, the icky bits as well as all the lovely bits. So I'm trying to pick up that piece and encourage people to have this experience. And in so doing, I think I know they are, the death phobia that is so prevalent in our culture, it can be softened when
I agree. Yeah.
when people embrace their dead.
Yeah. I know that one of the things that I hear a lot about when I talk to people about home funerals, the first concern is always, well, how are you going to keep the body fresh? We have refrigerators. They didn't have refrigerators back then. So you think, you just put it in a refrigerator and it stays nice. But how do you do that in absence of a refrigerator?
Well, we use dry ice, and dry ice is a very, very effective cooling. It's actually, it lowers the temperature of the body to much cooler than it does in just a regular refrigerator. So, we're fortunate to have dry ice, which arrests any kind of decomposition in the organs pretty much, within hours of putting the ice on. So there's nothing to be concerned about in terms of the body decomposing. There's also other forms of ice, Techni ice, which can get the body very cold if you put enough of that on it. So we have techniques to do that.
Okay. So another question that I'm asked about is disease. So if somebody, I think, because of COVID, everybody is kind of more aware, I think, of germs and things like that. Is it safe to have a home funeral because of germs?
Well, that's the interesting thing. When a body is sick and it's breathing, then most germs are airborne because of the breath. When the breath stops, there is no there's no worry for disease. Most of our bodies they die at home on hospice. So these are not bodies that have been in critical care in a hospital, dying from some infectious disease. These are people who know that they're dying and they're choosing this home funeral for themselves and their family because it's the most obviously natural thing to do. So we have very, very, we don't take infectious disease cases, of course. So that again isn't an issue. And most bacteria and germs, they're coming from a hospital, whereas ours have died
Right.
naturally.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and families have been bathing them and changing them and dressing them for days. So it's like the most natural thing is to continue that process for a few more days after death.
So since we're talking about like what people can be considered for a home funeral, can somebody with an autopsy have a home funeral?
Well, an autopsy is a very invasive surgical procedure, which requires what we call at our funeral home an autopsy repair, where the body is repaired and sutured with hundreds of sutures to repair that incision. Now, unfortunately, the body is, slightly compromised because the skin's been opened, whereas somebody dies naturally at home. The skin is the covering which keeps everything intact. So we can take it home, but it's not a traditional home funeral. It doesn't include maybe the bathing ritual and the very sacred 3 days. We take the body home and we can keep it there for hours, enough for a family to put eyes on it. If somebody died tragically in an accident, for instance, and was taken to the coroner, and there was an autopsy, we'll bring it back to the funeral home for the autopsy repair, and then we can take it to the home for a few hours so that the family members can see them and do a service there in the house. But it's not the full, rich, intimate home funeral because of the compromised body, but we do as best we can. And especially if someone's died suddenly and it's a parent of a child, they desperately need to see that child, and to have it come home is a very healing practice. So yeah, we do that. But we don't embalm. We're green, so that embalming procedure is not necessary.
Right. So what about in the case of organ donation? Can that body come home?
Yeah, that's the same thing.
Okay.
It goes for an organ donation repair, which was where we suture very tidily the incisions that were used to harvest the organs. And then, yes, the body can be brought home for a home funeral.
So I know that some people worry that, okay, so if I'm responsible for all of this and it's not at a church and there's, you don't have the preacher doing all of this, then what kind of things can I do to make this sacred, to make this personal, and how to do the send off if you're not going to do it that way? Do you have any suggestions about that?
Well, every regular funeral is a ritual in itself.
Yes.
And it's comprised of many different little rituals inside the umbrella of the funeral ritual. So everything that you do in a home funeral, from draping the bed in a beautiful fabric, from maybe shrouding the body in a beautiful shroud or fabric that you buy, to decorating it with flowers and placing candles in the room, all of these little rituals, which the family can do over the 3 days, is a way for them to channel their grief and express their love and move into this new world now that their loved one has died. So we encourage them to turn the home into like a temple. This is a shrine for your beloved. And then we'll come back the next day and the furniture will be draped with fabrics. There'll be flowers everywhere, music, very gentle music playing, candles are burning, and the loved one is laying in honor on a massage table, which is draped beautifully. Now this is the practice of making this transition sacred. We're saying, we love you, we honor you, thank you, and goodbye. One of our other rituals that we do is we take a cremation box to the house. Everybody is cremated in a cremation box. So we take it to the home with art supplies and the family decorate it. So while the loved one is laying in honor, maybe in the bedroom, in the living room, or on the patio, the cremation box is decorated with photos and messages and painted beautiful colors. Some people cover it in fabric or special papers. And so everybody who comes to the house during the wake to say goodbye to the loved one, they're also given the opportunity to express themselves and to maybe write a blessing on the box or put a message and tuck it inside. So that too is a powerful ritual. On the last day, the third day, we transfer the body. But we don't do it. We tell the family how to do it. So I'm just overseeing. I'm just showing them how, giving them permission and teaching them how to do it themselves. So on the third day, we'll say, now we're going to take the body from the table and you put it in the casket. And I'll show them how to do that. They lay it in the casket, and then the ceremony happens there in the living room or wherever they choose in the home to do it. The placing of the lid, the covering the body with flowers, all of these little rituals are maintaining this sacred nature of what just happened and how precious this life was and how beautiful this body is, and now it's no longer living, so we're going to dispose of it gracefully with mindfulness. And everybody in the room is participating in this ritual, and then it becomes whatever it becomes, and every single one is completely different. You know, some family might want to, everybody plays guitar and plays rock and roll. Another one will be somebody playing the harp and sacred music. Some are very simple, 5 people standing around the casket, laying flowers, closing the lid, and just saying a gentle goodbye. There's no one way to do this, which is what makes it so unique, because every family has their own special way of saying goodbye.
That sounds so much more personal and meaningful. And I think about, so I host a lot, and quite often as a hostess, you don't get to enjoy the party because you're too busy taking care of things. But it sounds like in this process, everything is a part of it, so you'd miss nothing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I would imagine that because the people, the families, the friends are so involved, that it makes the grief process easier. Is that true?
I'm careful with the word easier, because grief, and depending on how the person dies, obviously, all of those factors come into it. I think it softens the intensity, especially if it was a sudden death and a shock to the system. People are traumatized. They're literally out of their body, and having their loved one present here is a way to help bring them back in. And take a deep breath and exhale, because they're right there. They don't have to imagine them in a refrigerator downtown somewhere in a strange place. So it's definitely softened that shock if we bring them home. If they already died at home, yes, up until the moment that they died, they probably haven't had a chance to really grieve or to let themselves feel what they're feeling, because they've been so preoccupied in making sure the person's comfortable, taking care of them. And now that's stopped. The stillness is kind of riveting, and it allows the beloveds, the family members, to just sit close to the bedside, in silence on their own in that space. And now they can drop into their feelings. And that is the profound gift that they give themselves when they say yes to a home funeral.
Would digging the grave help in the closure?
Yeah, I think everything we can give them to do, whether it's paint the box, buy the supplies, lift the loved one from the bed into the box, have a procession down the street a little bit. Everything that we can physically do that moves the body helps move the grief and the shock through the system. So when it comes to actually physically digging a grave, which is really hard work.
It is hard. It's hard.
Very hard. That's one of the greatest ways to. You're doing this last thing for your loved one. You're going to put your muscle and energy into this effort because you love them. And yes, absolutely. Channeling that energy into digging.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my dog died. My dog was 100 pounds. And I dug his grave. And my hands were raw. They were bleeding. It was very hard. It's clay. And I needed to do that. I didn't want anyone else to do it. I had to do it. And it was very healing. It was, like you say, the last thing that you can do, from the last touch you can have with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So even though it sounds like, oh my God, why would you ever want to do that? I had to. I had to.
Yeah.
So, what are the cost differences between doing a home funeral and a traditional funeral, whatever that means?
Well, it obviously varies from state to state, town to town. Like a regular funeral from a funeral home, what the cost that you would incur would be, especially if you wanted to view the body, which most people do at a funeral, then the body is embalmed and dressed, made up. You have to buy a casket, a fancy casket, to display the body, or rent it. You rent the room, the chapel, to have the viewing, and the funeral home personnel. So all of those things add up. In a home funeral, you're doing it at home. Nobody buys the big fancy casket. People are realizing more and more that is really a waste of resources. You're just going to see this box for a few minutes. It's going to be, most of them, cremated. Or we have green burials where the body is put directly into the ground. So those caskets, that's a huge expense that we can avoid. And the family are doing everything themselves. So as a funeral home, we charged for the opportunity to do this, and our guides who go to the home to ensure that they're following protocol and the body remains at the right temperature. That's all they're paying for. So it's considerably different. And if you're adding a burial on top of a funeral, that can raise costs, anything up to $40,000.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you include the funeral and the burial, yeah, especially here in Los Angeles. But it's different in every town.
So if you were putting the body directly into the ground, then how does that work?
Well, first of all, you have to find a cemetery that is a green cemetery that allows the body to go directly into the ground without a hardwood casket, and definitely without a concrete vault.
Yes.
Most people don't realize that every cemetery, at least in the cities and that are not attached to usually a church, every cemetery, the casket goes into a concrete vault, which has a lid on the top. So decomposition takes a long time in that way. It's not natural. It just sits there in a tomb underground. So in a green burial, there is no concrete vault. The body touches the earth, or it goes into a biodegradable casket, which decomposes naturally with the earth. And, with it, everything decomposes and becomes part of the earth. So that's the big difference, which is a lot of people are wanting now. They don't want to sit in the ground in a tomb for 100 years.
Yeah.
They want to decompose. I think that's why a lot of people are choosing cremation too. They want to know that the body is returned, and their spirit free.
Now, one of the things that might shock people who decide to do this, and maybe they're thinking that's romantic, it's going to be so nice, and is that the body doesn't look like it did when it was alive. Can you speak about that a bit?
Wow. Well, I can honestly say that almost all the bodies that we have done, the dying process itself obviously changes the body, especially if somebody dies naturally at home on hospice. They become very wasted, so there is no muscle tone. So by the time they die, they look very different than they did when they were alive. So but they don't look worse when they've actually taken their last breath. They usually look much more relaxed, peaceful. The skin, it feels very different than it did when they were like a little sweaty or like struggling in their final days. Almost all of them, they look better than they did when they were dying, when they're now at rest, at peace. The only two things we do is close the mouth and close the eyes. So they just look peacefully resting. There's nothing done to them. They're not filled with chemicals. Their blood isn't drained from them, so their skin tone doesn't change like it does when they have the embalming procedure. That's why they have to wear makeup after the embalming procedure, but we don't do any makeup. You don't need to. And most people say that the person looked better when they died than while they were dying. So,
okay. So somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh, that sounds really good. And that they decide this is what I want to do. And then they run up against hospitals, funeral homes who says, no, you can't do that. You have to blah, blah, blah. And then they tell them, something else, something like, oh, you have to have a vault. You have to use a funeral home or whatever. Is there something that you can tell them to kind of educate the locals about? No, this is allowed. This is legal.
Well, there's two separate things here. One is the actual burial, which is done through a cemetery. So that's the first place to educate. You have to find a cemetery that would be willing to put the body directly into the ground and create either a natural or a green burial section of their cemetery. And that's perhaps the first place. That's the place to start, is educating these cemeteries that people want this now. They're not interested in being entombed in a concrete vault. Most cemeteries have a practice that they want the body entombed so that the ground doesn't subside after decomposition and dip, and so they wouldn't need to fill in that dip a year later, to keep the grounds maintained flat so that they can mow the lawns, put the pesticides on, and it's not a hazard. No one's going to trip because the ground has subsided. So that might be their reason for sticking to, we have to have a concrete vault. You can tell them that it's not legally necessary, but you might have to hunt around for a green burial cemetery. That's one aspect of this, re-educating the funeral industry and the cemeteries that we're leading back towards a more natural way of disposing of our bodies. And then, so the other piece is the funeral home piece. And that is finding a funeral home that would be willing to not embalm, but use dry ice instead to preserve the body while the family wanted a viewing. There are not many funeral homes that would support the body staying at home for the whole 3, even though you're legally allowed to. Because they haven't been doing this for a long time, they don't understand, or they're not perhaps trusting of the families to honor their beloveds in the way that we do, because we have families who come to us, we visit their home ahead of time, we vet them, and we know that these people are in alignment with the reason that we're doing the home funeral. So there's a level of trust there. I think a lot of funeral homes probably would feel uncomfortable with the home funeral. So they call it a home funeral, but they embalm the body ahead of time. They take it to the house in the casket, the hardwood casket. And usually funeral home personnel stay in the house with the family.
Okay.
Which is another way to do it. At least the body is at home.
Yeah.
But it's not the natural way that Sacred Crossings does it.
Okay. So it's a good idea to have an advocate or somebody who knows the ropes, sounds like. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I strongly recommend taking a class or 2, reading about it, to educate yourself. Education is everything. Once you're informed, then you know when you can say, no, thank you. No, thank you. We don't want that. It's hard to say no, thank you when you're grieving and somebody is telling you, well, you must. It's easy to go, oh, okay, if I must, because you don't know anything different. So yeah, that's the most important thing, is to learn as much as you possibly can about the rules, the regulations, the legalities, and the logistics for having a funeral at home.
Okay. So I think that living and dying naturally is a right and should be a no-brainer that we can do this for our loved ones and ourselves. So I appreciate you being here to kind of set the record straight on this.
Oh, you're so welcome.
So how can our listeners learn more about you and what you are offering?
Well, Sacred Crossings, sacredcrossings.com is the website, and we are twofold. There's the Institute for Conscious Dying, which is my education arm. I teach classes and workshops we train death doulas to go into the home and to support the individual and their family through the dying journey. The death midwives also guide and support the family after the last breath, up until burial or cremation. I also teach the funeral celebrant, because our death midwives usually end up being the celebrant in the home on the 3rd day. So I teach how to create a powerful life, a ceremony, a celebration of life ceremony, so that to conclude this journey. So classes and workshops are on the Sacred Crossings Institute and the Sacred Crossings Funeral Home here in Los Angeles. We specialize in home funerals, green burials, and full body deep sea burials. And we're finding that more and more people are choosing this as an option because it is the ultimate in green. You don't buy a plot of land, even a green burial plot. The body goes directly into the ocean, where it decomposes naturally on the sea floor.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here, Olivia, and appreciate what you do. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate it too. Bye-bye.
Bye.